Why did the commander suddenly fall silent? The crowd didn't notice at first. To them, it was just a pause in the middle of a speech, a breath taken too long. Families still waved flags, cameras still clicked, children fidgeted in their Sunday best. The brass band shifted in the heat, the notes of anchors away still ringing in the air. But on the stage, Commander Ethan Marshall's jaw tightened, and his eyes swept the bleachers as if searching for something, or someone. And then he found her. In the third row, almost invisible in her plain blue dress and cardigan, sat Claire Donovan. She should have looked like every other proud mother holding back tears, but something had betrayed her, something small, a detail that most would never see. He did. Her sleeve had slipped, not much, just enough for a faint line of ink to catch the morning sun. Marshall's voice faltered, his eyes narrowed. The crowd shifted, sensing a ripple of unease in the man they all respected. The graduates in formation straightened instinctively, their discipline absorbing even the smallest shift in the air. But Claire didn't move. She sat perfectly still, her hands clutching the tiny American flag so tightly the fabric trembled. She had promised herself she could do this, sit quietly, smile, cheer for her son when his name was called, and then disappear again. Just another face in the crowd, nothing more. But the past never really lets go. Ryan Donovan, her son, stood tall among the 19 who had survived Hell Week, surf torture, drown-proofing, log PT, and everything else the Navy SEAL pipeline could throw at them. He looked strong, steady, every inch the warrior he had fought to become. Claire's heart swelled with pride, yet beneath it fear pressed hard, because she knew what came after the graduation, after the applause and the photographs. She had walked that road herself. But Ryan didn't know that. Not yet. To him, she had always been Nurse Donovan, the single mother who worked impossible shifts at Norfolk General Hospital, who came home exhausted but still managed to smile at him, still made sure there was dinner on the table, still pushed him to chase the best version of himself. He had never suspected that behind her gentle hands lived a history of grit and blood, fire and silence, choices no one should ever have to make. Because she had hidden it, carefully, deliberately. She was proud of him, but she had never wanted him to walk in her shadow. The ceremony continued, the names of graduates echoing through the loudspeakers, each one greeted with cheers and clapping. Parents stood on tiptoe, waving phones high above their heads to record their sons in perfect dress whites. Claire sat very still, her pulse loud in her ears. She had worn those same whites once, and before that the fatigues. She had shouldered the weight of a pack heavier than her frame should have carried, and dragged men twice her size out of the fire. She had been the calm voice on the radio when chaos tore through the air. She had been Doc Donovan, hospital corpsman first class, embedded with SEAL teams across Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Horn of Africa. But that was another lifetime. Now she was just a mother, or at least she wanted to be. The sun climbed higher, glinting off polished brass and the golden tridents that glimmered like promises waiting to be fulfilled. Ryan stood tall, his face impassive, his jaw set, but she saw through it. He was nervous. His fingers flexed just slightly, betraying the storm he held inside. She had taught him to keep his composure, even when the world tried to shake him, and he had learned well. But he didn't know that those lessons had been forged in fire. When the announcer's voice called, "Donovan, Ryan," Claire's chest tightened. This was the moment. Her boy, no, her man now, was about to take his place in the brotherhood that had shaped her life in ways he could never imagine. She lifted a trembling hand to brush away a tear, forgetting the cardigan sleeve. The ink showed again. Commander Marshall froze. Recognition slammed into him like a round fired too close. That tattoo, it wasn't just art. It wasn't something someone wore without earning it. It belonged to one person, one legend. Doc Donovan. The name whispered across years of operations, told in barracks and briefing tents, a name passed like a story too heavy to forget. He had served with her. He remembered the dirt, the smoke, the chaos. He remembered her hands, bloodied but steady, stitching torn flesh under fire. He remembered her voice calling for medevac with a steadiness that had kept them all alive when panic should have broken them. And now she was here, in a cardigan, as a mother in the bleachers. His throat closed, his words stumbled, and in that silence hundreds of eyes turned toward him, not knowing what held him there, not yet understanding that history had just walked into their ceremony. Claire felt it, the shift, the air thickening. She knew what was happening even before he stepped down from the podium. She had feared this moment, the day her past would find her in the most public way imaginable. And now it was here. The crowd hushed. Marshall moved with slow, deliberate steps, his polished shoes striking the wooden platform, each sound a drumbeat against her chest. He came down the stairs, past the line of graduates, and walked straight toward her. Claire's breath caught. Her instincts screamed at her to vanish, to slip away into anonymity once again, but she couldn't move. He stopped in front of her. His shadow fell across her seat. "Ma'am," he said, voice low but unshakable, "would you stand?" 100 families shifted, confused. Whispers trickled across the bleachers. Ryan's head snapped toward them, his jaw tight. He didn't understand. Not yet. Claire's pulse thundered. Standing meant exposure. Standing meant admitting the truth she had buried for nearly a decade. Standing meant the end of her son's illusions, the shattering of the wall she had built to protect him. But she couldn't refuse. Slowly she rose to her feet. The cardigan slipped from her shoulder. The tattoo caught the light fully now. The insignia, the numbers, the silent mark of a medic who had served in fire. Gasps rippled through the crowd. And on the stage, Ethan Marshall's face changed. The hardness softened. The command melted into reverence. His voice carried out over the field, steady but thick with memory. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I want you to meet Hospital Corpsman First Class Donovan, United States Navy, retired. Doc Donovan." The name hit the air like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples spread, whispers growing into stunned silence. The families leaned forward. The graduates held their breath. Ryan stared at his mother as though she were a stranger. The graduation was no longer just a ceremony. It had become something else entirely. Why was his mother's name echoing through the loudspeakers? Ryan Donovan stood frozen in formation, every nerve pulled taut beneath his uniform. He had prepared for this moment for years, hell, for most of his life. The hours of grinding pain, the nights half drowned in freezing surf, the sand ground into every raw inch of skin. He had survived it all for this one moment. The trident, the honor, the recognition. But none of that mattered now. Because the man on the stage had just called his mother by a name he didn't know. Doc Donovan. Ryan's throat tightened. The words rang with weight, with history, with something bigger than he could understand. And the commander, one of the most respected warriors still standing, was looking at her not like a stranger, not like some ordinary woman sitting in the bleachers, but like she was a legend. Ryan's heart pounded. His mind tried to reconcile the two versions of the woman standing only a few rows away. His mother, the quiet nurse who worked night shifts, who patched up scraped knees and made pancakes when she could, who hugged him tighter on the anniversaries of his father's death. And this other figure, this myth pulled from the dust of war, etched in whispers passed between seals. They couldn't be the same person. But they were. Claire stood tall now, though her hands trembled at her sides. She felt Ryan's eyes on her. She felt the weight of the crowd pressing down like a storm. She had dreaded this moment for so long. She had convinced herself she could outrun it, that anonymity could be her shield forever. But here it was. The truth, standing naked under the morning sun. Ethan Marshall's voice cut through the silence, his tone shifting, rising, carrying the weight of memory. "You know her today as a quiet guest, a mother, but I knew her as the medic who refused to let us die." A murmur surged through the bleachers. Heads turned. whispers caught like wildfire. Ryan's stomach flipped. He wanted to move, to turn, to demand answers, but he couldn't. Discipline rooted him in place. Training kept him still, but his mind screamed with questions. His mother never told him, not once, not in 18 years. On the stage, Marshall stepped forward. His eyes burned not with accusation but with reverence. Fallujah, Highway Phoenix, 2007. Our convoy was shredded by IEDs, pinned in open ground. Machine guns pouring fire from the ridges, 11 of us bleeding out. He stopped, his breath caught. The silence weighed heavy, almost unbearable. I thought we were finished, but one medic, one woman moved through fire for 5 straight hours, wounded herself. She packed wounds, ran IVs. Cut open flesh with shaking hands and stitched in the dirt. She called in medevac under fire. She never stopped moving. The families leaned forward. The graduates clenched their jaws. Ryan's pulse hammered in his ears. She kept us alive, Marshall said. His voice cracked on the last word. None of us should have survived. We did because of her. Gasps rippled through the field. Ryan's vision blurred. His chest rose and fell too fast. He wasn't listening anymore. He was drowning. Every word shattered something inside him. He tried to catch his mother's eyes, but she was staring straight ahead, steady, unflinching, like a soldier under inspection. Commander Marshall's gaze fell on Ryan then. "Son," he said, his voice softer, but cutting through the air like a blade, "your mother isn't just a nurse. She's the reason men like me are alive to stand here today." The words landed like a strike. Ryan's breath caught. His whole body trembled. He wanted to shout, to break formation, to demand why she had hidden this, why she had let him walk blind into the very life she had lived. But all he could do was stand. The commander turned back to the microphone. His voice hardened again, carrying like a drumbeat. Doc Donovan set the standard for battlefield medicine. She ran toward fire when others crawled back. She didn't just save lives, she showed us what courage looks like. Claire closed her eyes. Each word was a dagger and a balm all at once. She hadn't wanted this, not the spotlight, not the reverence. She had buried her past not because she was ashamed, but because she wanted Ryan to be free, free of her reputation, free to carve his own path. Now the choice had been taken from her. The crowd shifted. Mothers leaned in to whisper. Fathers stared with jaws tight. And in the ranks of fresh graduates, 19 men stood taller, as though in the presence of something holy. The commander raised his hand. "Look at her," he said. His voice rang like iron. "This is the kind of warrior you pray is beside you when everything goes wrong." The silence broke. Applause thundered across the field. The bleachers shook. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even weeping. But Ryan couldn't move. His hands clenched at his sides. His chest felt hollow. Because he wasn't cheering. He wasn't proud, not yet. He was lost. His mother, his quiet, ordinary, gentle mother, wasn't who he thought she was. And he didn't know what to do with that. Claire finally turned her head. Their eyes met across the distance. For the first time in his life, Ryan looked at her and didn't recognize the woman in front of him. The cheers still roared, but between them, there was only silence. Claire sat back down, her body rigid, her hands trembling in her lap. The applause still surged around her, but she heard none of it. She only felt her son's stare, heavy, unrelenting. She had imagined this moment in nightmares, his face when he learned who she really was, and now she was living it. When the noise faded, Marshall returned to the podium. He straightened his notes but didn't look down. His eyes found her again. "Doc," he said, his voice firm but almost gentle, "would you join me up here?" Claire's chest tightened. She shook her head slightly, almost imperceptibly. She didn't want this. She didn't need this. But Marshall didn't ask again. His tone left no room for retreat. Slowly she stood. Her plain dress looked fragile against the backdrop of uniforms. Yet as she walked forward, a shift swept through the crowd. Respect deepened. Silence grew. Small in stature, but the air bent around her. She reached the stage. Marshall's hand steadied her as she climbed the steps. The graduates followed her with their eyes. Ryan's breath stuck in his throat. Marshall pulled out his phone, his voice solemn. "I want you to hear the words our nation recorded, the words that will never be forgotten." And then he read. The Navy Cross citation. Each line struck like thunder. The convoy torn apart, the storm of gunfire, the shrapnel embedded in her side, the 5 relentless hours, the 11 lives saved. When he finished, the field was still. No applause, no cheers, just silence, the kind that weighs heavy on the heart. Ryan swallowed hard. His mother wasn't just a nurse. She wasn't even just a veteran. She was part of SEAL history. Marshall offered her the microphone. Claire took it. Her hand didn't shake. She held it like she once held a radio, calling for life in the middle of chaos. "Gentlemen," she said. Her voice was steady, clear, unyielding. "You've conquered the hardest training in the world, but Bud S is not the end. It's the beginning." The 19 leaned forward, pulled by her presence. "Being a SEAL isn't about the miles you've run or the weights you've lifted. It's about the man beside you. It's about choosing what's right over what's easy. And it's about never leaving anyone behind." Ryan's throat closed. She wasn't reading. She wasn't repeating someone else's speech. These were her words, her truth. She turned to him. "Ryan," she said, her voice catching for just a moment, "I'm proud of you. Your father would be too. But never forget, you wear the trident not for yourself, but for your teammates, for the families who pray their warriors come home. That is the weight, and that is the honor." The crowd erupted again, but she didn't stay to bask in it. She handed the microphone back, stepped down from the stage, and slipped quietly into her seat once more. Ryan's chest ached. Every truth he thought he knew had unraveled in minutes. And now he had questions, questions that could no longer be ignored. Why didn't she ever tell him? The thought hammered Ryan's skull as the crowd broke into celebration around him. The ceremony was over, the tridents pinned, the formation dismissed. Families rushed forward, laughter mixing with tears, camera shutters clicking in a frenzy of joy. But for Ryan Donovan, the world blurred at the edges. He moved through it like a ghost, his chest heavy, his throat raw. Everyone else was celebrating. He was suffocating. He spotted her easily. His mother hadn't moved from her seat, though people around her leaned in with whispers and stares, their faces alight with recognition. Some even reached out as though brushing shoulders with her might transfer courage into their own veins. She gave them polite nods, but her hands were folded tightly in her lap, her expression unreadable. Ryan pushed through the crowd. His breath came shallow, his jaw set tight. He wanted answers, needed them. When he reached her, she stood before he could speak. Her eyes softened, a small, weary smile tugging at her lips. "Ryan." "Mom," his voice cracked, harsher than he intended. He forced it steady. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question hung heavy between them. Around them, families hugged their sons. Fathers shook hands, mothers kissed foreheads. But here, in the center of it all, silence reigned. Claire didn't look away. She held his gaze, though her eyes glistened. "Because this had to be your decision," she said quietly. "I didn't want you chasing my shadow. I wanted you chasing your own calling." Ryan's chest burned. "Your shadow," his voice rose, then broke. "Mom, you're a legend," Commander Marshall said. "I did my job," she interrupted, firm but gentle. "That's all I ever did, the same job you'll do now." Ryan shook his head. The words didn't make sense. "You saved lives, you changed things, people still talk about you, and you never once—" He stopped. His throat tightened too much to finish. Her hand reached for his arm, light, steady, grounding. "I didn't keep count," she said softly. "That's not why we serve." But Ryan wasn't grounded. He was spiraling. Every memory of her, every late-night dinner after a double shift, every quiet morning when she packed his lunch, it all twisted in his mind. She had lived another life, one he never knew, a life of blood and fire and choices too heavy to imagine. He pulled back. You lied to me. Her shoulders tensed, the words cut deeper than he knew. I never lied, she said. I just didn't tell you everything. Everything? His voice cracked again. You hid everything. You were out there saving lives, carrying scars, and I thought you were just— He stopped, his breath shaky. I thought you were just my mom. Her lips trembled at that. She swallowed hard. I am your mom, that's the truest thing about me. But Ryan's anger flared again, hot and raw. You could have told me. I had a right to know. Claire's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. And what would that have done, Ryan? You would have grown up in my shadow. Every step you took, every choice you made, you would have felt you had to measure up. And I couldn't do that to you. I couldn't let my past become your prison. He wanted to argue, wanted to scream, but her words struck deep. A prison. That was what she had feared, locking him in the weight of her reputation, chaining him to a life that wasn't his to choose. And yet, hadn't he chosen this life anyway? His jaw tightened. So you just sat there and watched me go through it blind, watched me suffer, break, drown, and you knew exactly what I was walking into. Tears slid down her cheeks now, silent and unashamed. Yes, she whispered. I knew, and it broke me every day. But I had to let you face it on your own. Because if I stepped in, if I told you everything, I'd be taking your fight away. And you deserved your fight, Ryan. You deserved to earn this for yourself. Ryan's fists clenched. Anger and pride, betrayal and awe tangled inside him, a storm too heavy to sort through. He turned away, dragging in a shaky breath. A voice cut through the chaos. Doc. Both of them turned. Commander Marshall stood a few feet away, his presence commanding even off the stage. His eyes softened when they met Claire, then shifted to Ryan. Son, he said, if you want to know what a SEAL should be, look no further than your mother. Ryan's chest tightened again. He couldn't breathe under the weight of it. He wanted to protest, wanted to scream that she wasn't who he thought, that none of this made sense. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, silence stretched between them. Finally, another voice broke it, deeper, rougher. Master Chief Robert Chin, scarred, weathered, a veteran of battles etched into the nation's memory. He stepped forward and clasped Claire's hand firmly. Doc, your protocols, your evacuation drills, we still teach them. You didn't just save lives, you changed the way we saved them. Ryan blinked, stunned. His mother hadn't only been a medic. She had been a builder of legacies. Her fingerprints stretched into classrooms, into missions, into lives that would never even know her name. His knees felt weak. The ground seemed unsteady. And then softer, almost too soft to hear. Are you worried about me? It was his voice. He hadn't planned the question. It slipped out, raw and unguarded. Claire turned to him, her eyes gentling, her lips trembling into the smallest smile. Of course I'm worried. You're my son, but I'm proud too. You've chosen a life of purpose. That doesn't make the risk less, but it makes it meaningful. Ryan's chest cracked open at that. His voice dropped, almost a whisper. Dad, he didn't come home. Her breath hitched. For a moment, silence wrapped them both. Then she nodded. Your father died with honor. If fate calls you the same way, you'll stand for the same principles. That's not easy, Ryan, but it's everything. His vision blurred. For the first time, he saw her fully, not just as the woman who raised him, but as someone who had carried both his father's loss and her own battles in silence. Something inside him shifted. Without thinking, he pulled her into his arms. For the first time, he embraced her not as the mother who had raised him, but as the warrior who had survived so he could live. She held him tightly, her tears warm against his shoulder. For the first time, he understood the weight she carried. And for the first time, she let him share it. That night the base was quiet. The crowds were gone, the graduates scattered with their families. But Ryan couldn't sleep. He lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. Her words, the commander's voice, the Master Chief's respect. Doc Donovan. He had grown up thinking he had to prove himself alone. Now he realized he had been carrying her blood, her courage, her fire all along. But he also carried her silence. And silence, he knew now, had a cost. What did it really mean to walk back into hell after you'd already escaped it once? Claire lay awake that night, the sound of waves crashing faintly beyond the base, the echo of applause still buzzing in her ears. But none of it felt real. The ceremony, the commander's words, Ryan's embrace. She replayed it all like fragments of someone else's life. Because for her, the past was never far. It lived under her skin, carved into muscle memory, stitched into scars no one ever saw. She closed her eyes, and the silence of her quarters bled into another silence, one far older, a silence broken not by waves but by fire. Fallujah. The air had been thick with dust, so heavy it clung to her teeth, her lashes. The convoy had been crawling down Highway Phoenix, armored Humvees grinding over cracked asphalt, rifles ready but hands tense. She had been seated in the back, medical kit strapped to her chest, stethoscope bouncing with each bump, adrenaline simmering beneath the surface. And then the world had torn open. The explosion had lifted the lead vehicle clean off the ground, fire ripping outward, shrapnel shredding through air and skin alike. Screams had filled the comms. The second IED detonated before anyone could react, splitting steel like paper. Machine gun fire rained from the ridges, tracers stitching the sky in orange lines. Chaos, pure chaos. She remembered the first body she reached, a man slumped against the twisted door, blood pumping from his leg in a rhythm that meant seconds left, not minutes. Training took over, tourniquet high and tight, pressure pack, IV. "Stay with me," she shouted, though the roar of gunfire nearly swallowed her voice. Rounds snapped overhead, dirt sprayed her face, she kept moving. Another man, chest wound, breathing shallow. She ripped open his vest, plunged her fingers into the wound, packed gauze until her hands shook, then sealed it with trembling tape. Her own shoulder burned, hot and wet, shrapnel had torn through her sleeve, but she couldn't stop. 5 hours, that's what the commander had said, but to her it hadn't been hours. It had been one long heartbeat stretched into eternity. She remembered the radio static hissing, her own voice cutting through it. "We need birds, immediate, we're not going to hold." The reply was garbled, hesitant. "LZ too hot, stand by." Stand by. She had screamed into that radio, not with fear, with fury. "We don't have time, 11 men down, if you don't bring those birds they die here." And somehow they came. By then she was drenched in blood that wasn't hers, skin raw from smoke, arms trembling from exhaustion. But she didn't stop. She dragged bodies through fire, shielded faces with her own frame, stitched and cut and pressed and prayed. When the last man was loaded onto the helo, she collapsed against the dirt, her own blood seeping into the ground. The silence afterward was the loudest sound she had ever heard. She opened her eyes now, back in the stillness of her quarters. The ceiling above her blurred. Her chest rose and fell in shallow waves. She had never told Ryan about Fallujah, never told him about Afghanistan or Somalia or the Horn of Africa. He had grown up with bedtime stories of heroes, but never the truth that his own mother had been one of them. Because she didn't feel like one. Heroes were men who died in flames, who gave everything in an instant. She had lived, survived, stitched herself together and walked away. And in the quiet years that followed, the legends grew louder while she shrank into silence. She hadn't wanted her son to carry that weight. But now he knew. And she didn't know if that was a gift or a curse. The next morning she walked the quiet path outside the barracks, the sun low, the air cool. Ryan jogged past with his classmates, sweat pouring, cadence echoing. He caught her eye as he passed, just for a moment. There was no anger now, but there was no peace either, only questions unspoken. She stopped by the water, staring out at the waves. Her hand lifted to the edge of her sleeve, fingertips brushing the tattoo that had betrayed her. The ink was faded now, worn by time, but the meaning hadn't faded. It had always been more than a mark. It had been a reminder of the lives she had carried in her hands, of the silence she had chosen to keep. She had lived by one rule: never let the past define the next step. But now, with her son wearing the trident, she wondered if silence had been a mistake. Behind her, footsteps crunched. She turned. Commander Marshall stood there, his presence as steady as it had been on the stage. He didn't speak at first. He just nodded toward the waves, as though he knew she came here to think. "Doc," he said finally, his voice low, "you never told him." Her throat tightened. "No." He studied her face, lines carved by years of carrying what no one else would. "You thought you were protecting him." She didn't answer. He stepped closer, his gaze softening. "He's proud, you know, even if he doesn't know how to show it yet. He'll carry it differently than you did, but he'll carry it." Her lips pressed together. She turned back toward the water. "I wanted him to have his own fight." "And he does," Marshall said. "But don't take away the truth. He deserves to know who stands behind him, especially now." Especially now. The words lingered. Because Marshall knew. She could see it in his eyes. The war wasn't done. Not for her son, not for anyone. And for the first time, Claire wondered if the past she had buried so carefully might be the very thing he would need most. That evening, Ryan found her alone again. He stood awkwardly at the doorframe, his freshly pressed uniform replaced with shorts and a t-shirt, sweat still clinging to his skin. "Can I come in?" he asked. She nodded. He stepped inside, sat across from her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "What was it like?" Her chest tightened. "What do you mean?" He swallowed hard. "Over there, being in it, saving them." Her fingers clenched in her lap. Memories clawed to the surface. She saw their faces, pale and broken, eyes glassy with pain. She smelled the smoke, the metal, the blood. She met his gaze. It was loud, and it was quiet, loud enough to shake your bones, quiet enough to hear every heartbeat, every scream, every prayer. Ryan's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Were you scared?" A pause, her eyes softened. "Every second." He nodded, jaw tight, but his voice was quieter when he asked, "Then how did you keep going?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Because they needed me to." The words hung heavy, simple but undeniable. Ryan leaned back, staring at her as though seeing her again for the first time. He wanted to ask more. He wanted to know everything, but a part of him feared the answers. Because the truth was no longer just about who she had been. It was about who he was now and what he would face. She reached across the table, her hand resting on his. "Ryan, listen to me. The trident isn't about glory, it's about weight. Every decision you make out there will carry someone else's life, and that weight, it never leaves." His chest tightened. He nodded slowly, though his heart thundered. For the first time, he understood what she had tried to shield him from. And for the first time, he wanted to know more. "How do you watch your child walk into the same fire that nearly consumed you?" Claire Donovan stood on the pier in Norfolk, the salt wind whipping strands of hair across her face, her cardigan pulled tight against her shoulders. Families lined the dock, waving flags and holding handmade signs. The Navy ship loomed like a steel giant, its deck alive with sailors moving in precise formation. And somewhere among them, her son. Ryan carried his pack with the sharp posture of a man who had earned his place, his trident gleaming in the morning sun. He didn't look back as he marched aboard. He couldn't. Looking back meant hesitation, and hesitation was something he couldn't afford anymore. But Claire's eyes never left him. Her chest burned with pride, but her stomach twisted with fear. Because she knew. She knew exactly what lay ahead. The sandstorms, the chaos, the silence between bursts of gunfire, the choices that carved scars no surgeon could ever stitch. When the ship's horn sounded, deep and mournful, Claire's knees trembled. Other mothers cried freely, clutching husbands' hands, waving until their arms ached. Claire stood silent, her tears hidden behind her steady gaze. She had done this before, watched men sail away into danger. But this time it was her son. And there is no training in the world that prepares a mother for that. Ryan's first deployment came fast. Task Force Viper, Middle East. The briefing had been short, the orders blunt. His team was to support local forces on a joint mission, a simple reconnaissance-turned advisory role. But there was no such thing as simple. The first time he stepped onto foreign soil in combat gear, the air felt different, thicker, heavier, filled with dust and tension. His rifle felt heavier too, though he had carried it 1,000 times. Every sound seemed sharper, the distant call to prayer, the rumble of trucks, the faint crack of gunfire somewhere too close to ignore. He kept his face calm, his steps measured, just like he'd been trained. But inside his heart raced. He remembered his mother's words, "Every decision you make out there will carry someone else's life." He hadn't understood it then, but now with his teammates' lives tied to his own, with locals staring at them from cracked windows and rooftops, he felt it. The weight. The mission stretched long into the night. Nothing went as planned. Locals were hesitant, the intel was vague, and whispers of insurgent movement spread like smoke. And then the first shot cracked. Ryan hit the ground instinctively, dust choking his lungs. Chaos erupted, shouts, return fire, the staccato bark of rifles in the dark. His training kicked in, his movements automatic. Cover, return fire, communicate. But nothing in training matched the sound of real rounds tearing the air inches from his head. Nothing prepared him for the sight of a teammate clutching his arm, blood spilling fast. Ryan crawled to him, dragging him behind cover, hands shaking as he applied pressure, shouting for a corpsman. And in that moment, a strange clarity washed over him. He saw his mother, not here, not literally, but he saw her in the way his hands moved, in the calm he forced through his panic, in the voice that told his teammate, "You're okay, stay with me." She was in him. Every lesson, every quiet strength she had carried, he was carrying it now. The corpsman arrived, the bleeding was stopped, the fight raged on. Hours later, when silence finally fell, Ryan sat against a wall, drenched in sweat and dust, his heart still hammering. He stared at his trembling hands. And he understood. He understood why she hadn't told him. He understood why she had gone silent, because words could never capture it. The weight, the fear, the way time bent in battle, you had to live it to know it. And now he knew. Back in Norfolk, Claire sat in the hospital trauma bay, her hands gloved, blood staining the gown across her chest. The emergency lights glared above her, and the sounds of monitors beeped steady, sharp. Another sailor, another accident, another night she stayed late to stitch what war or training had torn apart. But even as she worked, her mind was elsewhere. Every vibration of her phone on the counter made her heart jolt. Every knock on the hospital door carried the threat of news she prayed never to hear. She had been on the other side of those notifications, knocking, delivering impossible words to wives and mothers. Now she feared being the one who received them. When the sailor stabilized, she stripped her gloves, her hands trembling. She pressed them to her eyes, forcing the tears back. She couldn't break here, not in front of her team, not in front of the young medics who still looked at her like she carried the answers to every impossible question. But in the quiet locker room later, she let herself crumble, just for a moment. Because somewhere out there, in the dust and the dark, her son was learning the lessons she had bled to hide from him. And there was nothing she could do to protect him. Weeks later, Ryan sat hunched in a makeshift barracks overseas, sand clinging to every crevice of his gear. His team was asleep around him, bodies sprawled in exhaustion. He held a letter in his hand, the edges soft from folding and unfolding. His mother's handwriting curved across the page. "Ryan, I know you think I kept too much from you. Maybe I did, But understand this, your father and I didn't serve for medals or stories. We served because someone had to. And now it's you. Not in my shadow, in your own fight. Don't chase my name. Don't chase his. Chase the man you want to be, the man who brings his team home. That's what matters. That's all that ever matters. Love. Mom. Ryan swallowed hard, the words blurring as his eyes burned. He folded the letter carefully, slipping it into his chest pocket, close to his heart. For the first time since arriving, he felt steady. Because he wasn't alone. 2 lives, 2 battles, a mother at home stitching the broken, carrying silent fear, a son overseas fighting to find his place in the fire. They were separated by oceans, but bound by something deeper. The weight of service, the price of silence, the bond of blood. And both of them knew the fight was only beginning. What happens when the mission turns from routine to survival? Ryan Donovan learned that lesson on his 2nd month in country. The orders had been clear: patrol the valley, link up with local allies, maintain presence. Nothing flashy, nothing heroic, just boots in the dirt, rifles ready, eyes scanning every rooftop and shadow. But war never respects the word routine. The ambush came at dawn. The first crack of gunfire echoed across the ridgeline before anyone saw movement. Dust exploded from the ground as rounds stitched across the convoy. The radio lit up with shouting, voices tripping over each other, half drowned by static and gunfire. Ryan hit the dirt, heart pounding, rifle snapping to his shoulder. He saw muzzle flashes in the rocks, figures darting across the ridges, the sharp, punishing rhythm of machine guns pinning his team down. This was no training op, no controlled chaos. This was real, and it was merciless. One of his teammates cried out, collapsing near the lead vehicle. Blood poured through his sleeve. Another SEAL shouted for covering fire. Ryan didn't think. He moved. Sprinting through dust and bullets, he slid behind the injured man, grabbing his vest and dragging him back to cover. His chest heaved, lungs burning, but his hands worked steady, packing the wound, tying a tourniquet, whispering words that weren't even conscious. "Stay with me, you're good, you're not going anywhere." The medic arrived seconds later, but Ryan stayed crouched beside his teammate, shielding him with his own body as the firefight raged on. And in that moment, he understood something he had never grasped before. Courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about moving anyway, when everything inside you screamed to freeze. He had seen that in his mother's eyes. Now he felt it in his own veins. Back in Norfolk, Claire sat in her car outside the hospital, her hands locked on the steering wheel, her breath shallow. She hadn't even made it inside yet. She had gotten the call that morning, not about Ryan, thank God, but about another sailor injured during training. They needed her expertise in Trauma Bay 3. Normally, she moved fast, automatic, ready, but today her body wouldn't cooperate. Because she couldn't shake the image of her son in that valley. She didn't know where he was, didn't know what he was doing, but she knew enough. She knew how quickly a routine patrol turned into a death sentence. She knew what it felt like to carry a man's life in your hands, the way his blood pulsed against your palms while you prayed the helicopter wouldn't be too late. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. For nearly a decade, she had carried silence like armor. Now it cracked with every thought of her son. She wanted to call him, wanted to beg him to come home, wanted to scream at the universe for dragging him down the same road she had barely survived. Instead, she lifted her head, wiped her face with trembling hands, and forced herself inside. Because she had patience waiting, and in that moment, they were the only thing she could save. Ryan's patrol didn't end at the ambush. Hours later, when the valley was finally quiet, when the dust settled and the dead lay still, his team moved through the wreckage. He felt older somehow, though only months had passed since graduation. His uniform was torn, streaked with dirt and blood. His muscles ached from carrying weight far heavier than gear. The injured teammates survived, But Ryan knew the truth. Survival was borrowed time. Tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after, the valley could take it all back. That night, he wrote in his notebook. He had started keeping it on his second week overseas, scribbling thoughts that were too heavy to speak aloud. Mom, I get it now. I get why you stayed quiet, because words don't fit. They don't explain the smell of smoke or the sound of bullets tearing the air or the way time bends when you're holding someone's life in your hands. But I want you to know, I hear you now. Every word you never said, every silence you carried, I understand. He tore the page out, folded it, tucked it into the same pocket as her letter. The weight felt lighter, with both close to his heart. Claire's nights grew longer. Sleep came rarely, and when it did, it dragged her back to memories she had buried deep. One dream replayed often. The convoy in Fallujah, the fire, the screams, but it always ended differently than it had in life. In the dream, she never made it to the last man. She watched him bleed out, her hands frozen, her voice silent. She woke every time with her throat raw, her chest heaving. And now, every time she dreamed it, she saw Ryan's face on that last soldier. It broke her. She poured herself into her work, mentoring young corpsmen, teaching drills with relentless precision. She barked orders until her voice cracked, pushed them through simulations until they nearly collapsed. They thought she was tough. She was desperate, because she knew those medics could be the ones standing over her son one day, and she would not let them fail. Ryan's deployment stretched on. Each mission chipped away at the boy he had been, forging something harder, heavier. He laughed less, spoke less, but his eyes grew sharper, his instincts stronger. He had thought earning the trident was the test. Now he knew the truth. The real test was living with it. One night, his team huddled in the dark, radios buzzing with half-answers from command. He stared at the stars overhead, so bright they felt almost cruel. And he thought of her, the woman who had sat quietly in the bleachers, sleeves pulled low, hiding ink that carried whole wars. The woman who had raised him with gentleness, while carrying nightmares too sharp to speak. The woman who had saved 11 men in 5 hours and never told a soul. For the first time, he didn't just see her as his mother, he saw her as his blueprint. And he realized, maybe silence wasn't just hiding, maybe silence was sacrifice. Claire received a package 3 months into his deployment. Inside was a folded flag patch, worn and stained, and a letter in Ryan's hand. Mom, I don't know how to explain it, but I feel you out here. Every time things get bad, I hear your voice. Every time I want to freeze, I remember you didn't. You were right, I had to find my own fight. But know this, I'm not fighting alone. You're with me, always. Ryan. Her hands shook as she read it. Tears blurred the words, but she didn't wipe them away. For the first time, she let herself cry openly. Because he wasn't just her son anymore, he was her mirror. The distance between them was thousands of miles, but the bond between them was closer than ever. A son carrying forward what a mother had once lived. A mother learning at last that silence doesn't erase legacy, it passes it on. And both of them knew the hardest battles were still ahead. What happens when the silence breaks and the cost of service comes due? Ryan Donovan had been in country for nearly 6 months when the mission came down. High risk, hostile valley, insurgent stronghold that had resisted for years. Intelligence said they'd find weapons stockpiles, maybe even high-value targets. The kind of mission every SEAL trains for, and the kind that could swallow a team whole. The night before, Ryan lay awake on his cot, staring at the corrugated metal ceiling. His chest felt heavy, though his face stayed calm when his teammates glanced his way. He had grown into his role now, no longer the rookie, no longer the uncertain graduate standing in formation. He was steady, capable, but under the surface a storm churned. Because he knew this mission was different. He pulled his mother's letter from his pocket, unfolded the creased paper for the 100th time. Her words stared back at him, soft but unshakable. Don't chase my name. Don't chase his. Chase the man you want to be, the man who brings his team home. He folded it again, slipped it against his heart. And he prayed not for himself, but for the men beside him. Back in Norfolk, Claire woke before dawn, restless. The house was quiet, the hospital not yet calling her in, but she couldn't sleep. Something gnawed at her chest, a weight she had carried before, in years past, just before the radio crackled with the words no one wanted to hear. She went to the drawer where she kept it, the box of memories she almost never opened. Inside lay folded uniforms, faded photographs, her Navy cross, and a bundle of letters her husband had written from Afghanistan before he never came home. Her fingers brushed over the metal, the cold metal biting her skin. It had never felt like an honor. It had felt like a burden. 11 men alive, yes. But countless nights she had replayed what she hadn't done, who she hadn't saved, the voices she couldn't silence. And now her son was out there, living it all over again. She pressed her hand to her mouth, holding back a sob. She had never begged before. Not on the battlefield, not in the hospital. But that morning, she dropped to her knees beside the couch and whispered words into the silence. Please just bring him home. Ryan's team inserted before dawn, helicopters skimming low over jagged terrain, the valley sprawling beneath them like a scar. Dust whipped through the open doors, stinging his eyes. He gripped his rifle tight, steadying his breathing, listening to the beat of the rotors thundering in his chest. When they hit the ground, the silence was suffocating. No voices, no movement, just the crunch of boots and the low murmur of radios. The first hour was uneventful, too uneventful. The village ahead looked abandoned, doors swinging open, livestock wandering unattended. Ryan's instincts screamed. He signaled, scanning rooftops, alleyways. And then the world erupted. The first RPG slammed into a wall near the lead element, fire and debris exploding outward. Gunfire poured from hidden positions, rooftops, windows. The team dove for cover, returning fire, radios exploding with urgent shouts. Ryan's pulse spiked, but his mind stayed clear. He moved low, fast, flanking with 2 teammates. Bullets chewed the dirt inches from his boots. He felt heat kiss his cheek as a round snapped past. A teammate went down hard, a shout tearing from his throat. Ryan slid to him instantly, dragging him into a doorway, pressing hard on a chest wound that bubbled with every shallow breath. Blood slicked his hands. Stay with me, Ryan growled, voice steady though fear clawed inside him. Stay awake, you're not leaving. The corpsman scrambled over, eyes wide, hands working fast. Ryan covered them both, firing bursts into the street, his own body a shield. For a split second he saw her, his mother, kneeling in the dirt years ago, blood on her hands, fire behind her. Her voice echoed in his mind, because they needed me too. He understood more now than he ever wanted to. Back home, Claire paced the hospital corridor, unable to focus. She had volunteered for the late shift, hopping work would drown her fear, but nothing could. Every time the phone rang at the nurse's station, her stomach twisted. Every shout in the ER made her flinch. She was thousands of miles away, but she felt him, in her bones, the same way she had once felt her husband the night he never came home. And she hated herself for it, because she had told herself she wouldn't live in fear. But when it was your child, fear wasn't a choice. It was the air you breathed. A young medic approached her, clipboard in hand, nervous. Ma'am, the new guys, they're asking about triage protocols. Could you? She snapped her head toward him, breath sharp. Then she softened, catching herself. He was just a kid, barely old enough to shave. She took the clipboard, steadied her voice. Tell them this, triage isn't about numbers. It's about judgment, it's about courage, and it's about living with the choices after. Don't ever forget that. The young medic nodded, wide-eyed. She turned away quickly, hiding the tears in her eyes. Ryan's team fought through the valley for hours. The enemy was dug in, relentless, their fire coordinated, brutal. Every corner brought another ambush, another close call. By nightfall, they had secured the objective, weapons caches destroyed, intel recovered. But the cost was heavy. 2 wounded badly, another grazed, and every man carried the exhaustion of fighting death and refusing to lose. When the helicopters lifted them out, Ryan slumped against the bulkhead, blood still drying on his hands. He stared at them, shaking slightly, until one of his teammates nudged him. "You did good, brother," the man said, voice hoarse but steady. Ryan nodded numbly. He wasn't sure what good even meant anymore. All he knew was that he had kept moving. He had refused to freeze. He had carried what his mother had carried years ago. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid of her shadow. He was part of it. Claire got the call 2 days later. Not the call she feared. Not the words that would shatter her world. Just a short message, a voice on the other end. "Your son's fine, ma'am, mission successful." Fine, successful. Words that meant little and everything all at once. She hung up, her hand trembling. She pressed her forehead to the wall and let out a breath that had been locked in her chest for days. He was alive. But she knew better than anyone what fine meant. Fine meant breathing, but not whole. Fine meant alive, but carrying weight no one could see. Fine meant he was one step further into a world that carved away pieces you never got back. She slid down against the wall, whispering into the silence. "Hold on, Ryan, just hold on." That night, Ryan wrote again in his notebook. "Mom, today I finally understood you. Not just the stories, not just the silence. I understood the weight. The kind that stays after the gunfire stops, after the blood dries, when you're lying awake wondering if you could have done more. I think that's what you've carried all these years. And now I carry it too. But I promise you this, I'll carry it with honor. I won't let it break me. Ryan." He tucked the note into his pocket, close to the others. A collection of truths written in silence, carried like armor. Claire sat by her window, staring out at the night sky. Somewhere out there, her son was staring at the same stars. She realized then that her silence had never truly protected him. The world had shown him the truth anyway. But maybe silence wasn't meant to protect. Maybe it was meant to prepare. And now at last she knew her story wasn't finished. And neither was his. Why do some stories end not with fanfare, but with silence? 6 months after Ryan Donovan stepped onto foreign soil for the first time, he walked down the ramp of a Navy transport plane back on American ground. His uniform was dusty, his eyes shadowed, his frame leaner than when he had left. But he was alive. The tarmac in Norfolk was crowded with families, flags waving, voices breaking into cheers as men and women reunited in tearful embraces. Mothers clutched sons. Wives clung to husbands. Children sprinted into arms that had been empty for far too long. Claire stood among them, her hands trembling at her sides. She searched every face, her heart pounding, until she saw him, her son, stepping off the plane with steady strides, his pack slung over one shoulder. For a moment he didn't see her. His gaze swept the crowd, calm, almost detached, as though he wasn't sure where he belonged. And then their eyes met. Her breath broke. He dropped his pack and moved toward her. She pushed through the throng until they collided, his arms wrapping around her with a force that nearly knocked her off her feet. Neither spoke at first. Words felt too small, too fragile. Finally, Ryan whispered into her hair, "I made it, Mom." Her tears came freely now, soaking his shoulder. "I know," she breathed, "I know." The weeks that followed were both healing and haunting. Ryan adjusted to life back home with the quiet awkwardness of someone who had seen too much. He laughed when others laughed, nodded when people thanked him for his service, but behind his eyes, shadows lingered. He woke sometimes in the night, chest heaving, sweat soaking his sheets. He never spoke of the dreams. He didn't need to. Claire knew them well. One evening, he sat at the kitchen table, turning a mug of coffee in his hands. The silence stretched between them until he broke it. "Do they ever go away?" he asked softly. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. She set her mug down, her eyes steady on his. "The dreams, the weight." He nodded. She exhaled slowly. "No, they don't go away, but you learn to carry them. Some days heavier than others, but always there." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. He had expected as much. She reached across the table, her hand covering his. "Ryan, it's not about erasing it. It's about living with it, about choosing what you do with it. You can let it break you, or you can let it shape you." He swallowed hard, her words carving deep. As weeks turned into months, Ryan visited the hospital where Claire worked. At first, he just sat quietly in the trauma bay, watching her teach young medics, her voice calm and commanding, her hands precise. But soon he found himself stepping in, offering tips, sharing lessons from the field, his voice carrying weight none of the recruits dared to ignore. One day, a young corpsman asked him directly, "How do you stay calm when it's bad out there?" Ryan paused, glancing at his mother across the room. Then he answered, "You don't. You just move anyway, because someone needs you too." The words felt familiar, worn, passed down through blood. Claire caught his eye and gave the smallest nod. He smiled faintly in return. Months later, a small ceremony was held at the base. Nothing grand, no cameras, just a gathering of SEALs, corpsmen, and their families. Commander Ethan Marshall stood at the front, his voice strong but filled with quiet reverence. "We honor service in many ways, medals, promotions, ceremonies. But sometimes the greatest service is the one never spoken, the kind that shapes others long after the battle ends." He gestured toward Claire. "Doc Donovan did that years ago, and she still does it now." Applause rose, respectful, heartfelt. Claire shifted uncomfortably, as she always did in the spotlight. But when she glanced at Ryan, she saw no confusion, no anger, only pride. And that mattered more than anything. That night, mother and son walked along the pier together, the waves lapping against the pylons, the stars sharp above them. The air was cool, carrying the smell of salt and diesel. Ryan spoke first. "I used to think being a SEAL was about strength, about proving something. Now I know it's about carrying weight, about who you carry it for." Claire smiled softly. "You've learned faster than I did." He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "No, Mom, I just had you to learn from." They walked in silence for a while, their footsteps in rhythm. Finally, Claire spoke. "You know, I used to think silence was protection, that if I didn't tell you about my past, I could shield you from it, but I was wrong. Silence isn't protection, it's preparation. It teaches you to listen, to feel the weight when it comes." Ryan considered her words, his gaze on the dark horizon. "Then I guess," he said, "you prepared me better than I ever knew." In the months that followed, life didn't get easier. Ryan faced more deployments. Claire faced more nights alone, more prayers whispered into silence. They both carried scars invisible to most. But they carried them together now. The distance between them no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a bridge, built of silence, sacrifice, and the unspoken bond of blood. And slowly both began to realize that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits quietly. Sometimes it simply holds on. Years later, when Ryan stood at another graduation ceremony, this time not as a recruit but as a mentor, he caught sight of his mother in the crowd. She was older now, lines etched deeper into her face, her hair streaked with gray. But her eyes were steady, proud, alive. He carried her silence with him. He carried her strength. And he knew, whatever came next, he would be ready. Because he wasn't walking in her shadow. He was walking in her light. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't demand recognition or shout its name into the world. Sometimes dignity simply acts, quietly, steadily, until one day the world looks back and realizes it was courage all along.